This video will help you approximate whether or not you're on track to retire successfully. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. Arguably, the most common question I get are from folks in their 50s and 60s wanting to know, can I successfully retire, or am I on track to successfully retire? And while of course there's no infallible solution or way to perfectly predict what's going to happen, there are a couple of best practices so that you can back of the napkin math approximate whether or not you're on track for the retirement of your dreams. So in today's video, we'll walk through a couple of examples and how to do this math so that you can run it for yourself to ultimately get a barometer as to how well you're progressing. So let's jump in. First, let's touch on gathering up the basic building blocks you'll need to run a successful projection. Then we'll get into the math on how to apply all these building blocks. The first thing you're going to want to do, in my opinion, is add up all of your fixed income sources you can plan on in retirement. These would be things like Social Security income, pension income, if you've got any sort of annuities on the balance sheet, maybe what those will turn into by way of annuity income. If you own rental properties, rental income streams you can count on. And then lastly, if you're going to stay on as a owner in a business and you're going to get particular distributions from that, you could probably plan on that as a fixed income source as well. Now, I'm not going to apply the word guaranteed income to all these sources because a lot of them are not guaranteed, but they are fixed, meaning they're probably not going to go up a tremendous amount in one month and then go down a lot the next month. Then you're going to want to add up your non-fixed income sources. Generally, these are going to be all investment accounts, 401ks, traditional Roth IRAs, deferred compensation plans, individual stock accounts, joint investment accounts. If perhaps you own a business and the business is valued at $1 million EBITDA and you're going to sell it for 2 to 3 times EBITDA, then you could plan on that asset being worth $2 or $3 million. In addition, if you have any property on the balance sheet that you use but you're open-minded to selling in the future if you needed income, you could count the net equity in that asset as a variable income source because theoretically you could sell it and then invest that money and live off the proceeds. Historically, advisors used about a 4% safe withdrawal rate method to determine how much you should plan on pulling out of all of your non-fixed income sources in retirement without worrying about running out of money. The 4% rule came from a bunch of math that was done back in the day, assuming you retired in the worst possible market conditions with hyperinflation. You did not run out of money if you pulled out 4% of the starting balance plus inflation every single year until the day you died. It also assumed you invested all of your investment assets into a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio. And while that's a super simple and conservative way of estimating how much income you could pull out of an investment portfolio, the problem is most people in these scenarios died with like 2 to 3 times as many assets as when they started retirement. So safe withdrawal rate was almost too safe for 90% of these situations. The retirement planning landscape hasn't changed drastically, but there's been new research and different ways in which to pull out money in retirement from these income sources, ultimately resulting in being able to pull out more than 4%. And the math is sort of trending towards about 5.6% if you take more money out when times are good, and maybe you're willing to take out less money when times are bad. To keep it super simple though, I would use a 5% distribution rate, or at least that's what we use internally. We also combine this approach with the bucketing approach, which I'll link above here. This way, clients ensure that they never sell out of the stock market when it's losing value. Because we all know selling stocks at a loss is a cardinal sin of investing and a great way to lose a lot of money permanently. And so if we can set up your assets so that this doesn't happen, well, then you'll be all the greater for your retirement and all the more solvent. So fixed income sources, pretty simple. Whatever the number is on the statement is what you can plan on for your income. And variable income sources, a little bit more complicated, but essentially you add it all up, multiply it by 5%, and that's what you can probably plan on year after year from your investment accounts. The next variable you're going to want to solve for is what your lifestyle is going to look like in retirement. To keep it super simple, if you're used to spending 10 grand a month, that's not the worst assumption to use, that you're going to want to continue a lifestyle costing 10 grand a month in retirement. For the sake of simplicity on this video, we're not going to factor in taxes into some of this math, but to do it right, you probably would want to take the extra step in nuanced approach for all of these items. Now, of course, if there's going to be a major expense in retirement that you're going to want to plan for, I would just recommend subtracting that dollar amount from your variable income sources just to keep it simple. For example, if you're walking into your retirement with $1 million of investment assets, but you need 500 grand to move to Florida after selling the house and blah, 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 then I would just plan on you having 500 grand of leftover investment assets to turn into an income stream. The last variable to figure out is when you want to retire. Now, if you're going to retire tomorrow, well, then the math is a lot simpler than if you're going to retire in 20 years, because if you're going to retire tomorrow, for the purposes of this calculation, you don't need to factor in inflation, because odds are dollars today is going to have the same purchasing power roughly as dollars tomorrow. Whereas if dollars today is going towards goals 20 years from now, then inflation is very much going to erode that purchasing power. Let's take an example couple who's 65 today and wants to retire today. Let's say right now they're spending 10 grand a month or 120 grand a year, and they want that lifestyle to continue through retirement. First, we're going to want to add up all of our fixed income sources, which for this couple, let's say is 2 social security checks at 2 grand each, so 4 grand total. And then one of the spouses worked for the school district and they have a $2,000 a month pension. Now, fortunately for this couple, their fixed income sources all continue to grow with the cost of living. Social Security and then government pension plans have cost of living adjustment factors attached to them so that your purchasing power keeps up with inflation generally. So of the $10,000 a month income need they have, 6 grand a month is met through fixed income sources, which means we have 4 grand a month of non-fixed income sources we have to solve for. 4 grand a month times 12 months is $48,000. $48,000 per year divided by 5% reverse engineers to about $960,000 or $1 million, just to keep it very simple. And again, that was through applying the 5% distribution rate we just talked about. So by definition of math, if they don't have $1 million today, then they cannot retire today under the same expectations, or at least in my opinion, they probably shouldn't. Now, a number of people have entered into retirement when they do not have the level of assets that my perfect math would say that they should have. But as far as a best practice is concerned, this is probably the standard I would try to meet if I'm them and I don't want to worry about money in retirement, is meeting what the reverse engineered math says to do, at least from a back of the napkin standpoint. So some super simple solutions they have is delay retirement, save more and delay retirement, or adjust what they plan on spending in retirement, namely lower it. I think hoping for better than expected investment returns is not reasonable, and then hoping to die well before the assumed mortality for most retirees probably isn't the best financial planning approach either. Even though both of which would allow them to retire, I don't know if that's the best planning approach. I would rather see this client control the controllables by delaying retirement or reducing how much they think they're going to spend in retirement. Now let's say that same example couple is actually 20 years out from retirement. So instead of being 65, they are 45. And they want to know, are they on track to retire successfully? Let's say they're spending 10 grand a month today, which is 120 grand a year, and they want their lifestyle to continue in retirement. But they've got 20 years to go. So as we have all been around the block, 20 years ago, money didn't have the same purchasing power as it does today. So 120 grand over the next 20 years, assuming a 3% inflation rate, is equivalent to about $216,000 per year, which is 18 grand a month, not 10. So although they spend 10 grand a month in today's dollars, really we want to plan on them spending $18,000 a month in future dollars. So that's the number we need to solve for. So step one, we got to add up all of their income sources. Where are they going to get income from in retirement? Let's say they hop onto SSA.gov, they download a couple of Social Security projection statements, and Social Security says at 65, you're each going to have checks worth 2 grand each. So 4 grand total. But Social Security reports those numbers in today's dollars. So you'd probably want to add some inflation onto that to figure out what it's going to actually be at age 65. In addition, and this is super nuanced, Social Security is kind of based on your income. So if you project yourself to make more and more income throughout your career, then you can probably add some additional inflation on top of the projected amount you'll get. But for the simplicity of this math, let's just add inflation onto that benefit. Let's also say they're going to get that same 2 grand a month expected pension from the school system, which also has cost of living on it, and pension calculations are generally based on your highest few years of earnings, which most likely would at least be going up with inflation over your career. So if we inflate both of these income sources, Social Security, and then our government pension, which was 6 grand a month in today's dollars, but will be 11 grand a month in future dollars, aka when they are 65, they can plan on getting about 11 grand a month from Social Security plus their pension. So of the now $18,000 a month income need in retirement when they are 65, $11,000 a month is being met through fixed income sources, Social Security and pension, which means we need to solve for $7,000 a month in non-fixed income sources. $7,000 a month times 12 is $84,000 a year. Applying that 5% distribution rate, we would divide 84,000 by 5%. This reverse engineers to about $1.7 million in investment assets that this family will need when they are 65. And by definition, if they are not projected to have $1.7 million by the time they're 65, then they shouldn't plan on retiring based on their current plan. They should either plan to decrease lifestyle expenses, plan to work longer, or, since time is on their side, plan to save more. Again, not a big fan of people planning on dying well before most people are assumed to have mortality, nor am I a big fan of throwing out the 8% investment return assumptions we'll talk about in a little bit and pretend that they're going to get 20% magically in their investment accounts. So then, $1,000,000 question, how do they find out if they are projected to have $1.7 million? Well, for this, you can either use one of the online calculators I'll link below, or on Excel, you do a payment solve equals PMT, and then you fill in some variables. Basically, what we want to solve for is how much do you need to save in total every single year for the next 20 years to get to $1.7 million, assuming an 8% investment return rate applied to your current amount of savings or lack thereof. The math would seem to show that if you start with nothing, you'll need to save $37,000 every year for the next 20 years in order to reach $1.7 million. If, however, they're starting with maybe $250,000, then they're going to need to save about $12,000 a year or $1,000 a month. And if by the age of 45, they have $360,000 in total investment assets, then they actually don't need to save anything additional, because over the next 20 years, at an 8% investment rate of return rate, they will accumulate $1.7 million. Okay, so calls to action wise, step 1, inherit all the money you're ever going to need to successfully retire. If that's not doable, however, I'd highly recommend laying down some foundational legwork here to figure out if you are on track, back of the napkin wise, for a retirement of some kind. It doesn't matter if you're planning on retiring next year or in 20 years, all the math I laid out in this video should be enough to at least get you started to know if you're in the ballpark to successfully retire. There's, of course, tremendous nuance we didn't get into relative to taxation, timing Social Security, Roth conversions, required minimum distributions, Medicare, et cetera, But ultimately, I hope this is enough to get you started in seeing if you are on the right trajectory to get to where you're trying to go. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have further questions, I'd say drop them in the comments, but we've had to pause those for now. So if you need anything else, feel free to reach out on all my other social medias or submit an inquiry on the website. We'll help you get squared away. Have an awesome rest of your day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.